What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Numberfire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com, as we are taking a look back at Week 16 and all that went down in NFL DFS. My name is Jim Sadas. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com, joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for Numberfire. Brandon, happy Week 16 to you. Happy holidays. How you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I don't want to talk about my season-long teams too much.
Season-long sucks. Yeah.
Yes, it's not very fun. Losing in the playoffs, it's just not a fun feeling. But thankfully, I was able, even though I benched Devonta Freeman and it cost me a consolation matchup, I played enough of them in DFS, so you get that angle. So, all things considered, pretty good.
I'm shocked you benched him because we said good things about him.
Yeah, I know, but. Yeah. I was frankly, I kind of forgot to check again because I'm worried about my DFS teams, and it's like, Oh, it's 101. All right, got my DFS teams. I'll square it up, and I'm like, I think maybe I wanted to shuffle around my running backs, and then I didn't. So
well, that's what I do too, because in the morning right away I'll do my season long teams because I just don't want to think about them, and then. If something happens later on, like that week that Alshon Jeffrey was supposed to play and then was like, just kidding. I forgot to take him out. So, it's the same thing. Where I just kind of, pretend that season long doesn't exist after, 7 a.m. Eastern on Sundays, which is for the best, believe me, very much for the best. But it was a weird weekend because Saturday was really good. The Sunday main slate was not as good, but then the primetime slate was good because nobody used Damian Williams for some reason. So I get it, but also he's the only dude who's had any workload in this backfield all year long, and he was 8,000 in the single game slate. So that was weird. I was very happy about that, but it was a weird weekend for sure.
Yeah, you wake up and you find out Derrick Henry's not playing, and
I canceled all my entries after I heard that because I was like, I could just fix these or I could just cancel them and start fresh. Because I was trying to do yesterday, I knew I didn't have a lot of time on Sunday morning, so I was trying to work ahead on Saturday, and then I got the news that he was being downgraded to questionable, and I was like, we've made a mistake, and because I had a lot of Tannehill and I didn't feel as good about that offense. If he was going to be out. So I was like, we're just going to cancel everything, which I've never done. I just I refused to edit all these. So I just started fresh, and it was a weird day for sure.
Yeah, but at least you can do that. And it's like you had Derrick Henry on your season long team. And then you're like, what do I do? I don't have Dion Lewis.
It's almost like DFS is better. Weird. Yeah. Weird. This is our final recap show of the year. We're not going to have a recap after week 17 because why would we want to do that? We will have preview podcasts, though, throughout the playoffs. Our Thursday preview podcast will be recorded Thursday at a time to be determined. It'll be sometime during the afternoon. So make sure you are subscribed to the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and I believe that one will be on YouTube. I'll try to tweet out the time once we get around to deciding because I have procrastinated on that because I've been busy reading emails for the past 15 days. So we'll get around to that, and I'll tweet it out when we're recording on Thursday. We'll have preview podcasts throughout the playoffs, though, so make sure you are subscribed to the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. You can also get the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio there for NBA each day. Let's dive in now to the game-by-game recap here for Week 16. Starting off with that first game on Saturday, Jameis Winston started things off with a bang, and the Bucs, they crawled their way back, but 4 picks is very interesting on Jameis's part, and the Texans offense just kind of crumbled again with no Will Fuller. What'd you see here, Brandon?
Yeah, no Will Fuller, and news came out this morning that Fuller's out for Week 17, could be a 3-week injury. So, again, it's one of those situations where, sure, there's extra volume to go around, but the offense is less efficient, and that really is problematic. Deshaun Watson really just had another one of his dud days on the road, 184 yards, no passing touchdowns. Still had 37 rushing yards to lead the team. But, Watson just has these games pop up in his profile. He has 4 games this year with no passing touchdowns, took 5 sacks here. He has more bust potential than a lot of the other expensive quarterbacks. We don't always know when it's coming, but you take Will Fuller off the field after, he played 19 snaps, but it's just not good for this offense. DeAndre Hopkins and Kenny Stills did get 9 targets. Stills led the team with 57 yards and 98 air yards. Hopkins just 39 air yards for him in this game, according to FantasyADHD.com. Hopkins still a safe bet to lead the team in targets as always. I mean, he's going to lead the team in targets pretty much every week, but again, Fuller's out next week, could be a multi-week injury, and really, even if you take Will Fuller off the field, we don't always see Kenny Stills come through with a safe floor. And again, without Fuller, the ceiling for the offense drops as well. Carlos Hyde here had 17 carries for 27 yards against the NFL's best rush defense. The backfield's just not been relevant all year for DFS. Houston hosts the Titans next week, so there are playoff implications in this one. The total is 48 points, according to FanDuel Sportsbook, so that will be one of the better games on that 15-game main slate next week. For the Buccaneers, they did not have Mike Evans. They did not have Chris Godwin or Scotty Miller. And Jameis Winston, who's dealing with a thumb injury, still threw for 335 yards, but just 1 touchdown and 4 picks. He will chuck it. He had 623 air yards in this game, according to FantasyADHD.com. That's the 7th most in a game since 2012. That has value for DFS, but as we saw on Saturday, it doesn't always lead to a safe floor, despite some yardage upside. There were 48 total pass attempts for the Bucs. 12 of them went to Brashad Perriman, who did have 102 yards on 7 catches. 10 targets went to Justin Watson, who scored. 7 to O.J. Howard, 5 for Dare Ogunbowale and Cameron Brate. The past 2 games here, pretty much, I mean, Chris Godwin did play last week, but still 20.5% of the targets for Brashad Perriman, 17% for O.J. Howard, 14% for Watson and Brate. Perriman's, I mean, he has a lot of air yards because Jameis just chucks it. He's the top option. Watson and Howard are getting some good usage too. The backfield, really nothing to kind of dig into there, even though Ronald Jones scored. They host the Falcons in Week 17. There's nothing on the line. Still some passing yardage to be had, probably, but I think it'll mostly come down to the prices for the Bucs.
Right, and like Jameis Winston's consistently in DGAF mode, so I don't think nothing on the line will really affect him. I thought it was wild that people were like poo-pooing Brashad Perriman for having just 6 targets in Week 15 without acknowledging that Chris Godwin played 2.5 quarters in that game. Oh, he won't get any extra. Definitely not going to happen. He had 12 targets on Sunday, so consider that at times. I think that I agree with your assessment that the salaries will matter, but the Falcons is a pretty intriguing spot. So I want to have you name that salary for both Perriman and Justin Watson in that matchup, assuming Jameis goes, which I'd assume is a pretty safe assumption.
For Perriman, I was thinking around, I mean, with his workload and the yardage upside, which also leads to like yardage floor, maybe 68. I think that apparently that's going to be too low, based on what your reaction. But yeah. I mean, I'm not really going to lay down like $7,500 for Brashad Perriman.
74 on Saturday.
I know. I didn't really play the Saturday slate, but like I know he's pricey. But like I still am worried about the like touchdowns, the picks. I mean, Jameis Winston's hurt too. Like, I mean, I'll bump it up to 7,000, but I'm not really laying that. Like, I'm not playing a lot of Brashad Perriman at like that.
What about Watson?
In the low 6s, I guess, with 10 targets.
So I would say 73 for Brashad, and I'll go with 63 for continuity's sake for Justin Watson. Perriman is 76, Watson 61. I can get into both those. Would prefer to go Watson because he's cheaper, but
Look, I mean, I know I was low on Perriman, but like it's a 15-game slate. I really don't know how much Brashad Perriman I'll get to, even if he were at 7,300, like you said.
What would be more Jameis Winston than dropping 6 tutties in a meaningless Week 17 game?
Dropping 6 pick sixes.
Hey, he can do both. Why not both? Just keep Matt Ryan off the field by throwing pick sixes, throwing tutties. Let's go. In the penultimate number fire FanDuel free play, Kentman 513 edged EJ Belair for the win to get free number fire premium and some cash. Kentman 513 had Drew Lock at quarterback. Let's ride, man. Love it. But more importantly, Drew Lock was not the reason they won. That was Saquon Barkley, Devonta Freeman, Tyler Boyd, and Mark Andrews. Your last chance at Number Fire Premium is coming up in week 17. Tune into Thursday's preview podcast to get the URL and to enter. Let's move down to the afternoon game on Saturday with the Bills at the Patriots. Patriots locked up the AFC East, and Tom Brady played pretty well here, which is encouraging, I think, for the Patriots down the stretch. The Bills defense, I would say, is overrated because they faced a really easy schedule, but Brady did average 0.22 passing net expected points per dropback. That is actually his best single game mark since week 8 against Cleveland. So since the Mohamed Sanu trade, this is his best performance. He did throw deep just twice, so it's still not a high upside offense and not the Patriots, but it's at least better than it had been previously. The problem is that they did that with spread out volume because Julian Edelman had 6 of 32 targets that led the team. He played 71% of the snaps through his knee injury. Mohamed Sanu played 96% of the snaps. He had 5 targets for 24 yards. Edelman is the top guy here. It is a mess after that, and I think that's annoying, but Sanu has solidified himself as the second option if you want to go at this team. Sonny Michel had 21 carries and 2 targets, but it was at home against a team that actively encourages you to run against them. He needs 120 yards and a touchdown to pay off, and he needs 2 touchdowns to make you regret not using him. Not likely. I think the bigger takeaway here is that James White's pretty done, kind of as we thought after last week. He had 3 carries and 5 targets on 45% of the snaps. We got Rex Burkhead mixing in, and if 3 guys are playing significant snaps, this is a backfield to avoid. In something that's likely pretty pertinent for the playoffs, the Bills leaned heavily on Devon Singletary here against the Patriots. He had all 15 running back carries for the game, and it came with just 1 target, but Singletary played 96% of the snaps, which is a huge number. I think that what that says to me is that when the Bills need a win, they're going to go all in on Devon Singletary and ignore Frank Gore, which is huge for playoff DFS. So remember this, log this mentally in your brain for the first round. We'll talk to Brandon about this in a second, but it's good to know that when the Bills have a must-win game, they're going to lean heavily on Devon Singletary. The Patriots seem to focus on shutting down John Brown, and they did outside of 1 play. So Josh Allen dumped 12 targets to Cole Beasley, while Brown had just 4. It means the Bills will occasionally take what is given to them, which is noteworthy from a matchup perspective going forward. Beasley had 3 deep targets Saturday. He actually has multiple deep targets in 4 straight games, which is weird. Brown is still the top guy here by a mile, but my willingness to use Beasley is slowly creeping upward is the way that I would phrase that. Brandon, I want to talk to you about Devon Singletary. I think that this is a pretty big game from a playoff perspective. So I don't want you to name that salary, but what was your takeaway from Devon Singletary getting this usage in such a big game?
I mean, you can't ask for much more from a running back in DFS than usage. I mean, you want usage in a good offense, but
right.
That's a very small subset of running backs right now, really.
Yeah.
So you either need a huge workload, which Singletary has, or you just need to be kind of a committee back on a really good offense. I mean, there are players who, have elite workloads on elite offenses, but that's not really what we see a lot of at running back this year. I mean, it's not team jam him in like it used to be.
Right.
So Singletary with this workload, I mean, that's very, very promising. They play the Jets next week.
Bills cannot move. They're the 5 seed no matter what. So Frank Gore week, I guess.
Yeah. But. So there's going to be a lot of that. Just teams that are recently eliminated, teams that can't move. I mean, I think the Bills might be the only team that can't move. I don't know where
the Ravens can't move.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would not be shocked if Matt Barkley plays in that game. He might not start, but I wouldn't be shocked if he at least plays. Because if I were Sean McDermott, I would play Matt Barkley. I would play Frank Gore and kind of let your guys rest up a bit. But we'll see how it shakes out. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. But the Bills locked up. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that Devon Singletary in the playoffs is going to be a guy we are going to focus on. Let's move now to the Saturday night game. My boy Jared almost got it done here. Had a really bad pick 6, but I thought he played well outside of that. What'd you see here, Brandon, starting off with the 49ers side?
Yeah, the 49ers won here, bounced the Rams from the playoffs. So we'll talk about that more in a second. But Jimmy Garoppolo pretty disappointing in this game. 9.2 yards per attempt, but the expected points per dropback, not really there. 2 picks, 1 touchdown. He's been efficient on the full season. Not really changing my opinion here on Jimmy Garoppolo. I think you and I have both been kind of higher on Garoppolo than what consensus might be. I think he's a pretty good quarterback, all things considered, just a low-volume passing offense. Just 27 targeted throws here. George Kittle had 8. Emmanuel Sanders and Deebo Samuel had 6. They've really been the 3 key pieces in his passing offense in recent weeks. In 7 games with all 3 active, Kittle's at a 30% target share, which is elite for any player. Manny Sanders is at 21%, Samuel's at 17%. So it's pretty much a 3-man passing offense. Manny has 38% of the air yards. So again, just concentrated targets from a usually efficient passer, and that helps a lot. Raheem Mostert scored for the 5th straight game, but had 53 yards on 11 carries, 1 empty target. Played 73% of the snaps, though. He's easily the best bet to produce in this backfield right now. Tevin Coleman got around 40% of the snaps, had only 5 touches. We know that every team plays Sunday next week, but the 49ers actually got flexed to the Sunday night game with the Seahawks, so they're not on the main slate. So the takeaways will have to wait until the playoffs, really. For the Rams, not a whole lot of takeaways now because they're eliminated from playoff contention, and we don't really know what next week will look like for them. But Jared Goff did produce league average efficiency against one of the NFL's best pass defenses. So really well when adjusted for opponent, was not sacked a single time. Robert Woods and Tyler Higbee led the team with 11 targets. Brandon Cooks had 6. Cooper Kupp had 4. This team's really undergone a shift in targets in recent weeks. Since week 12, Robert Woods has 29% of the targets, which works out to 11.4 per game, which is massive. Higbee is at 25%. Kupp is at 15%. Brandon Cooks at 11%. So, Woods has been the clear number 1 in recent weeks. Higbee's actually 3rd in targets per game among tight ends in this sample. So we don't know what the Rams offense will look like in week 17 because they're eliminated. But if the starters play, then it's Woods followed by Higbee. Todd Gurley scored twice on 15 carries, had 2 empty targets, played about 80% of the snaps. So he's been in at least 68% of the snaps in 7 straight games since the bye. But, next week going to be hard to trust with nothing on the line. The Rams host the Cardinals, which could have some, fantasy fun if the Rams play their starters. But again, we don't know yet.
Yeah, hopefully Brett Hundley is not the starter for the Cardinals because that would kill a lot of that. But unfortunately, Darrell Henderson's on IR now because that could have been an elite Darrell Henderson spot. So I wish he hadn't gotten hurt, but because that would have been really fun. But I think I'd agree with you. Higbee, even with Gerald Everett being back, played almost every snap. He hurt his wrist, I think, at one point and left for 4 snaps. But outside of that, it was all Higbee. So it's Woods, it's Higbee. Everyone else is like a rotational piece when you're game stacking it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's move on to Baltimore at Cleveland here in the Sunday games. Ravens locked up home field advantage, which means they're probably going to rest a bunch of guys next week. They'll get a first-round bye, too, which means that they may actually not have time without Mark Ingram because he did get banged up. Hurt his calf in the 4th quarter. Gus Edwards had 12 carries and 1 target. Justice Hill, 3 carries and 4 targets. It would likely be a 2-headed attack here if Ingram were to miss time. Edwards would play kind of like the Sony Michel role where he gets most of the early down work and maybe a target or 2 accidentally. And then Hill would kind of be like James White. I think there's value in Gus if Jackson is playing because they're likely to be ahead. But he could have some issues if they fall behind. So I would assume that Ingram is definitely out next week, and I'd assume that Lamar is out too. But for the playoffs, Mark Andrews got banged up again toward the end of the game, so my guess would be that he would sit next week too. But when healthy, he keeps asserting himself as being the team's top passing game option. He had 9 targets. That ties his most this year. Overall, he's up to 24% of the targets for the season and 29% of the deep targets, despite playing through a bunch of injuries. He has 23% of the red zone targets. So once they get to the playoffs, you wouldn't think they'd be blowing teams out by 50 like they have been for a lot of this year. So when that happens, Andrews' value will go up quite a bit. So as long as he's good to go, I think he's similar to Devon Singletary, where we want to actively start buying him once the playoffs begin. The Browns had some slim playoff odds going into the game, but those are done. Wasn't a bad game, though, by Baker Mayfield, I didn't think. He had 0.14 passing and expected points per dropback, and against this defense, that's not bad. It's been a bad year for the Browns for sure, but I think that we need to, keep in mind the context here of it was a team under a first-year coach with a bad offensive line. I don't think this year taints Baker's long-term outlook all that much. Teams have bad years, and that's what happened here with the Browns. The target share stayed pretty similar to Jarvis Landry had 8 targets. Odell Beckham had 6. The Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt dynamic stayed the same too. So status quo here, unless we get word that they'll change things up next week with the playoffs out of reach. I want to talk to you about the Ravens, Brandon. Let's talk about this backfield here. I'm assuming no Mark Ingram. I'm assuming Robert Griffin III is going to play in Week 17. Would you trust this offense and using pieces of them in DFS if RG3 is at quarterback, assuming there is no Mark Ingram?
Trust, no. Will I play them? Take some dice rolls, yeah. This backfield's been one that again, not to talk too much about season long, but this is kind of the backfield that you load up on lottery tickets. In case Mark Ingram gets hurt. And they've rotated in, different backs throughout the year. And Justice Hill's been like, I don't know what the overall Twitter consensus is, but he's been, we know that he's got some athletic ability. Yeah. We know that he can produce. And look, this offense is great because of Lamar Jackson, but they can probably do a lot of this similar stuff to a lesser degree with Robert Griffin. So those running lanes could still be there.
Yeah. So RG3 is 7,000. It's the Steelers, so it's a really tough matchup. But I kind of like RG3 a lot. He's healthy, I think, and he can be good. So I find it interesting, is what I would say about RG3.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of value next week. So I guess pricing is probably going to be irrelevant. So I'll probably get to more Brashad Perriman than I thought, because it's not the same kind of slate as it normally is.
Right. Gus Edwards, $6,600. Justice Hill, $59. It's a pretty big salary for Gus Edwards, given that he won't have his starting quarterback and he's not going to get targets. So that would make me a little bit hesitant, even though, again, like you said, salary kind of doesn't matter. It'll be something we'll talk about on Thursday for sure. Let's move now to Jacksonville at Atlanta. Brandon, more Julio targets. We said, hey, he's not going to get 20 again. He almost did. So what'd you see in this one?
Yeah, 15 targets for Julio Jones. And despite being eliminated from the playoffs, the Falcons have been giving their key pieces good work in recent weeks. Julio Jones has 35 targets over the past 2 games, 166 yards on 10 catches here. He's just a monster. We can probably feel better about the Falcons than a lot of other teams who are just out of it. Julio Jones has 42% of the targets over the past 2 games without Calvin Ridley. Austin Hooper's at 18% of the targets in this 2-game sample. Devonta Freeman's at 17%. 14% for Russell Gage as well. It's still mostly Julio for me among the pass catchers. Not super engaged in Russell Gage right now. Austin Hooper maybe. But Devonta Freeman is really interesting. He had 11 targets in this game, 74 yards, 9 catches and a score. That was paired with 13 carries, 53 yards and a touchdown. He's had a reliable role since he's returned from injury. About 20 or so opportunities, plays roughly 2/3 the snaps. Got up a little bit higher in snaps last week. This game got out of hand, so but he still played 2/3 of the snaps this week. So the real issue is that they play at Tampa Bay next week. You can't really run on Tampa Bay, but Devonta Freeman can still get targets, and Julio Jones could be in play for another 20 target game against the Buccaneers.
Devonta Freeman can't run on anybody, so I don't know. Matchups kind of don't matter. He's only been really good in good matchups, so I shouldn't say matchups don't matter. But you're not going there for rushing efficiency.
Yeah, but his receiving has been there. Early on in the year, he was getting 6 targets a game. So he's not out of play despite that matchup on the ground.
I need to check here. How many rushing yards do I need to hit the over on his rushing prop?
Yeah,
we need 315 yards. So let's do it, Devontae. 315 yards. I believe in you.
Have the Bucs given up 315 rushing yards all season?
They're about to.
Oh, man. For the Jaguars here, Gardner Minshew's
He's the answer, man.
13 of 31 against an improved but not elite defense indoors. Negative .04 passing net expected points per dropback in both Week 16 and as a 3-week average as the starter. Again, the NFL average on the full season is .09, so he's been well off the radar there. Gave 7 targets to DJ Chark, who played through his injury, but just 2 catches for 18 yards for him. 6 targets for Leonard Fournette and Seth DeValve. 5 for Chris Conley, who had a 42-yard touchdown and a nice sideline grab, I will add, on both of his catches. D.D. Westbrook, I mean, he was the only one who did anything for this team. D.D. Westbrook, 4 targets. I really don't even care about the target shares here because Minshew's just been bad. Yeah. 7.1 yard average target depth for him on the full season, but 6.2 the past 3 games, which would be a league low if it were the full season mark. But I mean, for what it's worth with the target shares in weeks 14 and 16 when Chark played, he has 25% of the targets. Fournette's at 18%. Westbrook's at 16%. Conley at 12%. So, I mean, Chark's target share is there, but, I mean, Minshew's not really enough. Fournette, kind of the same thing. Really good workload, 15 carries, 6 targets, 105 yards, but no touchdowns. The touchdown equity just has been too low for him all season. I got to stop making him a priority play, which I've done in recent weeks, and it's helped my bankroll.
Oh, yeah.
They host the Colts next week with no playoff implications.
Yeah. I used him so much earlier in the year. It's very weird to me to like pass over his name, be like, oh, I'll go Myles Sanders instead. Sure, that sounds great. Yep. Gardner Minshew is basically Derek Carr with a better mustache and less efficiency, which is what you want, you know. What?
It's just like,
so he's not Derek Carr, but he's Derek Carr.
Yeah, he doesn't throw the ball deep very often. I mean,
doesn't throw the ball well very often.
Drew Brees has his average target depth like 6.4 yards. It's not good, but he's still just good.
So, yeah. So he's Drew Brees. If Drew Brees were terrible and had a mustache.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And I mean, Michael Thomas, Chris Conley. I mean, pretty much the same
I'm
top
trying to
receiver.
think of a difference between the two of them, and I'm struggling. So I think this comp checks out. Leonard Fournette is Alvin Kamara. Okay, you know. We're all on board here. Let's move on to the most elite game of the entire week between the Bengals and the Dolphins. And it was an awesome game. And it was very weird because there are people victory lapping on Twitter because a game with wind wound up being a shootout. And I think that's very stupid because if you're doing that, you don't understand probability. A game with high wind is less likely to shoot out than one with lots of wind. No one is saying the game cannot shoot out. And if you don't understand probability, you probably shouldn't play DFS, and you should make note of the numerous games this year that have gone under due to high winds. Be better. Be better. An extra quarter meant an extra quarter of targets to Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki. Both guys had 12 targets. Devontae actually had 15. They had 9 of 11 deep targets, too. Since the Preston Williams injury, if we exclude the game that Devontae left early, Parker has 26% of the targets. He has like a ton of deep targets too. Gesicki's at 19%. Gesicki has gotten 7 deep targets the past 2 weeks, which is pretty elite for a tight end. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Dolphins let Josh Rosen start next week, but I would really, really hope they just let the Fitzmagic ride, because if he does play, I know they're facing New England, but like even then you could consider Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, just because Fitz has been so beautiful for DFS. Myles Gaskin looked pretty good here. The Dolphins gave him a long look, and he led with 16 carries. He had 3 targets, playing 38% of the snaps, but he hurt his ankle. He was declared out for the game, which probably means he's out next week. Patrick Laird did play 54% of the snaps, and he could be in line for big work again next week. DeLance Turner is the other running back who was active yesterday. I don't think you want to go there at New England. I think it'd just be Parker and Gesicki. Joe Mixon was battling the flu, which put me into a panic right before lock, but still played a bunch. He had 21 carries and 2 targets, just didn't really convert on that volume. So if you decided to stick with Joe Mixon, and I did in some lineups, I swapped out a lot of him. Got to get some more Chris Carson. You can feel pretty okay with the volume, how it wound up. It just didn't work out. John Ross came back here and had 13 targets, but it was Tyler Boyd who really benefited. He had 15 targets, 2 touchdowns. Ross had 13 targets, 7 of which were deep targets. And I think this puts Ross in play for next week for sure. And it'll be pretty intriguing. It also does help Boyd's floor to have that deep threat. He got kind of banged up in that game, so keep an eye on that. But the arrow is up for both those guys, and it does help Andy Dalton a decent amount too. I just wouldn't expect it to be quite as good as it was for that Dolphins game. Brandon, I know we love Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki. I am willing to use them despite a terrible, terrible matchup next week. What about you?
Yeah. I've been using them for a long time, and then it got cool, and then I stopped using them so much. But I mean, I'm still using them because I mean, they don't throw the ball to anybody else really.
Yeah.
And Parker's, I mean, I know it's the toughest matchup you can really get, but Parker is still going to get 10 targets. It's, so long as
minimum.
yeah. So I mean, so long as Ryan Fitzpatrick plays, that
right. If it's Rosen, not, we can jump ship.
But,
yeah. I think. Yeah. All right, let's move on here to the Panthers at the Colts. The Panthers very committed to this Christian McCaffrey record thing. Will Grier debut, not great, Bob. What'd you see in this one?
38-6 win for the Colts. The Colts had 32 rushing plays to 30 passing plays. Masked a pretty terrible game efficiency-wise from Jacoby Brissett, who averaged 4.4 yards per attempt and negative 0.19 passing net expected points per dropback. Worse yet.
How do you have that happen and score 38 points?
Nyheim Hines just houses multiple punt returns.
And that's a good strategy. Other teams should consider that.
Yeah. I mean, never mind. I'm just going to go out. We'll talk after the pod, but worse yet.
Is it a Nyheim Hines he should be cut thing?
Or? Yeah, everyone hated Nyheim Hines.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking
about. And I'd love Nyheim Hines.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, look, these speedy guys have value if they're used correctly. But anyway,
got to use them correctly.
24 targeted attempts here went to 10 different Colts players, which is not good for DFS. T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle led with 4 targets. Nobody cleared 26 yards. In 2 games with Hilton back, he does lead with a 23% target share, but that's just 6.5 per game. Jack Doyle and Zach Pascal are at 16%. Marcus Johnson's at 14%. This is not enough for me in DFS, especially in a run-first offense. Marlon Mack had 16 of 26 running back carries, 95 yards and a touchdown. Jordan Wilkins had 9 for 84 and a touchdown. Nyheim Hines, again, had 2 punt return touchdowns. Mack played 50% of the snaps, giving him 41, 45, and 50% of the snaps the past 3 games. He doesn't have a receiving workload. I don't really think we need to get there. They're at the Jaguars next week, so the matchup's not terrible, but this is not a team that I'm going to target actively based on what we've seen from them down the stretch. For the Panthers, our boy DJ Moore left with a concussion after only 6 snaps. Will Grier's passing probably was worse than it would have been if DJ Moore played, but still not very good overall. Lost 9.15 passing net expected points, 5.2 yards per attempt, 3 picks. He threw downfield 10 times on 44 attempts, which is fun. Just completed only 2 of them, completed 3 of them to the other team.
Yeah, so he completed 5 attempts. We don't need to specify which team caught them. We can paint things in a positive light here.
I mean, look, if he's going to chuck it, that helps, but what doesn't help is the target distribution, because 15 of them went to Christian McCaffrey.
Oh, it helps. It helps some people. It helps McCaffrey lineups quite a bit.
Yeah. Curtis Samuel, Greg Olsen, Jarris Wright had 5. Chris Hogan and Ian Thomas had 3 from Will Grier. Nobody had more than 2 downfield targets, though. So while Grier did throw it deep a lot, he didn't really fixate on anyone. So it's basically just give the ball to Christian McCaffrey, and then everyone else kind of take what you can get. So there's nothing actionable for Week 17 for me outside of McCaffrey, who did not score but had 173 yards. Again, 15 catches for him. He has 215 yards from tying Chris Johnson for the all-time scrimmage yards record, 136 from getting past Marshall Faulk for second place. He's averaged 11.4 targets per game since Week 9, second most in the NFL regardless of position. They host the Saints in Week 17. New Orleans will be playing to win, which is a little bit concerning, but McCaffrey's probably going to see as much work as he can get.
Yeah, he's also 67 receiving yards from 1,000. And we know David Johnson a couple years ago, they were trying really hard to get him that. And given the way the Panthers have been playing this, they're going to try hard to get at least that from McCaffrey. But like, I feel like kind of what you said, there's nobody else here we'd want to use, right?
No. So, I mean, with Will Grier, like, we know that they're going to force feed Christian McCaffrey, but like, what price are you thinking is fair? Is there nothing too high, basically?
So the salary cap on FanDuel is 60,000, like 40.
Like, are you locking in Christian McCaffrey kind of no matter what if you're building one lineup?
If I'm building one lineup, yeah, because I don't think there are enough games that make me feel great where I know where the usage is going to go to not use him, I guess.
Yeah, and there's going to be value there. It's going to open up. So,
yeah, are you the same thing there?
Probably. I think you take the safety that where you can get it, and we know that he's going to get 30 chances. 30 touches, basically.
Absolutely. So let's move on here to the next game, which is the Steelers at the Jets. And Pittsburgh losing here means that they'll have motivation for next week. They still need a win to have a shot at the playoffs, but this offense is terrible. So we want to target teams with something on the line, but I don't want to target this offense. Devlin Hodges got benched for Mason Rudolph, who then got hurt. Hodges came back in. He was bad. Rudolph had 2.72 passing net expected points when he was out there. Hodges had negative 0.48. And the main appeal in real football for Hodges is that he doesn't make mistakes, but he's been making mistakes recently. So if Rudolph can play, he'll give the offense more upside. He'll make them more volatile. He'll have a little bit of Jameis in him, and that's better for DFS. So let's hope Rudolph is okay, because I would love to have another relevant offense in the slate, and I can't go there with Duck Hodges. I didn't use any of them despite facing the Jets this week, which should show you my level of confidence in this team with Devin Hodges starting. James Conner got hurt again, too, and left in the first half. He's been banged up all year, so it's hard to see him playing next week. I don't want to go here if he sits, because Benny Snell led with 7 carries. Kareth White had 6. Jalen Samuels had 3 carries to go with his 6 targets. I like the Patriots, and the Patriots were really bad at football. So this backfield is just dust to me. I really do not want to watch them in the playoffs desperately. Juju Smith-Schuster returned and didn't do much. He had 4 targets. Instead, Deontay Johnson led with 9 targets, and James Washington had 8. Juju said this week that he still wasn't 100%, and I think that the usage here may reflect that, though he did play 79% of the snaps. If Juju's going to be out there, it's hard not to put him first among the pass catchers, but Johnson he's been decent. So I am torn on how to handle this team. I'm going to ask you broadly about them in a second here, Brandon, but I'm leaning towards putting Smith-Schuster first if I hate myself enough to use this team. The Jets, they get ridiculed quite a bit. They get dunked on Twitter, but they're 6-9. They're 500 in games that Sam Darnold has started. So
nice.
They've kept fighting. Yeah, exactly. And that's worth something. Le'Veon Bell's a part of that too, and his usage has stayed pretty high. He had 25 carries and 4 targets. I would expect him to keep getting big work because they don't have any young dudes behind him unless I think they signed Kenneth Dixon. I used to really like Kenneth Dixon, so I wouldn't mind if they were to give him a look. But I'd assume Le'Veon plays next week too. Jamison Crowder had 8 targets. He has 19 in the 2 games Demaryius Thomas has missed. He's at 37% in those 2 games, and Robbie Anderson is at 19%. Both those guys have 3 deep targets in those 2 games. So I think it's the same as what you said in our recap podcast last week, where both these guys are in play and they get a bump with Demaryius out, but I'm still going to ride with Robbie Anderson for the upside. He didn't do a lot outside of the touchdown on Sunday, but overall, I would still rather buy into him. Brandon, I hate the Steelers' offense. It makes me want to gouge out my eyeballs. What do you think about them?
When you were going through their market shares and just who's relevant, I just thought back to like when they had Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. And it was like, can you play Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell in the same lineup? Yeah,
and
probably.
The answer was yes.
Because the market shares were just so good. Now it's like, what do you do with any of these guys? So Baltimore's locked in to their seed. I mean, Pittsburgh going to need a win. So it's possible Baltimore just rests up, and then we're getting a a team that really needs a win against a softer matchup.
Yeah.
I want to play.
Bookmakers know that RG3 is going to start, and the Ravens are still 2.5-point favorites.
What would you pay for Juju in this matchup?
Like 55.
He's 5,900.
Oh wow, okay. I thought I'd be way off. Okay, well that's more interesting. Deontay Johnson is 6,000. I don't want to go there, but it's low enough where I'm not going to cross them off completely, I guess. What about you?
I think I'll keep them in my player pool for most of the week because they should be playing against backups.
You would hope. Like if Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith sit, that Ravens defense was pretty bad earlier in the year before they were healthy and playing. So
Peters
that
did
would
get
help.
banged up.
Right. And if Mason Rudolph starts over Devin Hodges, that helps too. So there's a path to me using them, but I need help to get there, essentially. So we'll see. Let's move now to New Orleans at Tennessee. Brandon, Michael Thomas broke the single season record for receptions in a year, but Alvin Kamara, he scored some touchdowns. Hallelujah.
Touchdown regression finally hit for Kamara. This game was like the shootout of the week. Got 66 total points. Kamara scored twice on the ground, had 11 carries for 80 yards, had 7 targets for 30 yards. That's 110 total yards, priced at just $7,200, so not bad. With the receptions, the touchdowns came, and that's really all you can ask for. In the red zone specifically, he had 4 of 5 running back carries and 1 of 5 targets. I know that's something that we talk about quite a bit, is his work, inside the red zone, near the goal line. It was pretty good this week. He played 68% of the snaps, which is kind of in line with what he typically has gotten since returning from his injury. And he's kind of what we know Alvin Kamara to be, about 20 touches, lots of receiving work. We kind of joked, but kind of like Leonard Fournette on a way, way, way better offense.
Yeah.
So whenever Kamara and Fournette are priced similarly, this is for me, but just play Alvin Kamara.
No, people got mad at me when I was talking up Alvin Kamara on Twitter. I was also talking about how he's been draining my bankroll, so maybe that was why.
Well,
he's no longer doing that. Thank you, Alvin.
Paying up for Michael Thomas will not drain your bankroll because he's amazing.
Yes.
Broke the single season receptions record with 144, 12 catches on 17 targets for 136 yards and a touchdown. He has 32% of their targets since a Week 9 bye, 12.6 targets per game, both NFL bests. He's a monster. Kamara's at 21% of the targets in that split. Jared Cook is at 14%, so he's the only other Saint with double-digit target share there. Cook did score twice in a long time ago revenge game, but just 4 overall targets. I don't want to chase that too hard. His price has been trending up. I mean, I still like him in the right spots, but this offense, we have Drew Brees, Kamara, Michael Thomas, Jared Cook in the right spots. So it's a pretty simple offense. Face the Panthers next week in a game that matters for New Orleans. Carolina cannot stop the run, so we could see another solid game from Alvin Kamara yet again. For the Titans, no Derrick Henry in this one led to a potential value spot for Dion Lewis. Didn't really convert. Played 75% of snaps though, 16 touches, 87 yards, 1 catch on 2 targets. So it was fine. It was okay at the price of $4,800. It's not a must chase spot if Derrick Henry's out again in Week 17. But 75% of snaps for that low, I would go back there again. Probably 9 times out of 10. Ryan Tannehill again performed above the NFL average in passing efficiency this week. Had 3 touchdowns on 26 attempts. Averages just 28 attempts per game in 9 starts. Just 25 targeted throws this week, but similar to Jacoby Brissett, he spaced them out a lot. 10 different players had a target. A.J. Brown busted with just 2 targets, 34 yards on 1 catch in shadow coverage by Marshawn Lattimore. It was Tajay Sharp who led with 6 targets and 2 touchdowns. Jonnu Smith scored. Corey Davis and Smith each had 4 targets. But since Week 12, the target shares are 25% for A.J. Brown, which is still only 6.2 per game, 15% for Corey Davis, 13.8% for Tajay Sharp and Jonnu Smith. So Even when you adjust for 3 games with Sharp active, it's about the same. A.J. Brown is the only relevant pass catcher. None of these guys have elite market shares outside of that. And frankly, the volume got the best of A.J. Brown. I know it was a tough matchup, but it's in the range of outcomes whenever you throw the ball fewer than, it's kind of like the Seahawks we've said. It's kind of what we have here. But they're at Houston next week in I think a win and in situation. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So that's going to be a very relevant game. I'll go back to A.J. Brown there. So I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll go back to A.J. Brown. I want to talk to you about Dion Lewis. As you mentioned, the workload is there, 75% snap rates, 87 yards. Only 2 targets, though. And if I'm going to use a guy like Dion Lewis, who I know is not going to get me elite rushing efficiency, I kind of want more targets. So let's say that Derrick Henry can't go next week. We would be getting I would assume, value running back on a team that needs a win. And even when Derrick Henry is not out there, for some reason, they still insist on running, which is weird. He did lose some carries to a guy who came up off the practice squad on Saturday. Name that salary for Dion Lewis in week number 17, assuming that Derrick Henry sits once again.
Yeah, if he sits, it's like I value this, like the spot a lot. They're going to need to win. I would probably still pay up to like $6,000 for Dion Lewis because he should get more targets. And really the reason I played him was like, I felt like he's a lock for like 6 targets.
Right.
So, next week.
And maybe he would be if you play that game 5 times. Maybe we just hit the wrong end of the variance here.
That would be my assumption. But what are you thinking for him?
I think around $6,500. Just because, again, it's a spot we want. We want teams that need a win. We want the potential for passing down work, and Dion Lewis checks those boxes. So I think 65 would be a fair salary for him. He is $5,400. So if there's no Derrick Henry again, I would say Dion Lewis is, unfortunately, once again, someone we're probably going to want to use.
Yeah, if we get him for like 5,400, again, I'm just going to go back to it because I know I was low on Brashad Perriman, but it's just one example where I'm willing to pay prices I wouldn't normally pay because there's going to be a lot of value. So that's going to happen.
And there are going to be situations where, guys are potentially stepping into volume, but this would be one where we would know that the guy's stepping into volume on a team that needs a win. So that's pretty valuable. So
47 point total in that game too.
Yeah, disappointing output for Dion Lewis for sure. And it is an imperfect profile given he didn't get a lot of targets and that there are guys who will get other work there. And I don't like the offense as much when Derrick Henry's not out there, but he would still very much be an option at $5,400 and someone we'd be talking a lot about on Thursday. Christmas Day means a monster basketball slate, and FanDuel has it covered with their most wonderful contest of the year. This year's Santa Slam kicks off the true beginning of the NBA grind with $1 million in total payouts for just $12.25. $12.25. I just got that. December 25th. I get it. Take a shot. Well done. Take a shot at FanDuel's biggest prize pool for NBA so far this season. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move now to the Giants at Washington. Another overtime game between 2 awesome teams because why not? And we said going into the week that it was a downgrade to go back to Daniel Jones, and he made us eat our words. Congratulations to you, Danny Dimes. He went nuts with 0.64 passing and expected points per dropback. It was an elite outing, and he took just 1 sack, so dude played really well. We need to adjust, I would say, on Danny Dimes, and the way I'd say this is that he's very volatile. He can have very bad games, but when he's facing a bad pass rush, we can see games like this. We saw this against Detroit, too, where he had that bad pick 6, but then went nuts after that. So against a good pass rush, a team that can exploit his biggest weakness, which is, loves hanging on to that football, desperately wants to hang on, we shouldn't downgrade the offense. But if he's facing a team like Washington that's not going to rush the passer, we could see games like this. So kudos to him on a really good game. And that benefits Saquon Barkley, too, as he had a monster day. He had 189 yards rushing, 90 receiving, 22 carries, 4 targets, so he's back to his old form. I would still hesitate when he's in a tougher matchup, but those the midseason concerns for him are definitely dried up by now. Golden Tate led the team with 11 targets. 3 of those were deep as well. If we look at the 3 games since Tate came back from his injury, 2 of those were started by Manning, which is worth keeping in mind. But Sterling Shepard leads with 24.7% of the targets. Tate is second at 20.6%. Then there's Caden Smith at 16.5%. Darius Slayton, just 5 total targets the past 2 weeks, though he did miss a lot of Sunday's game due to a knee injury. He returned the fourth quarter, but he had just 3 targets last week, too. So I think going forward, I'm ranking Shepard first, despite Tate having a better day here. I'll put Tate second. And then Caden Smith is an option if Rhett Ellison keeps on sitting, and Slayton, to me, is an afterthought in this offense. On the Washington side, Dwayne Haskins got hurt. He couldn't return. I am guessing he will sit next week, though not necessarily a bad thing. He said he wanted to come back in, but Dan Snyder wouldn't let him. Case Keenum played well for them early in the season, so it might not be a terrible thing if Case Keenum plays. They'd still be run heavy, still be pretty boring, but it would be interesting. And they kept throwing the ball to Steven Sims a lot. He led with 10 targets. He led with 11 targets last week. So over the past 3 games, Steven Sims has 31% of the targets. Terry McLaurin is at 23%. I'm not putting Sims above McLaurin, but he's at least a viable DFS play, which is noteworthy. And if we get Case Keenum against Dallas next week, kind of interesting. McLaurin's the top guy here, but it's nice to have options. Adrian Peterson and Chris Thompson split the work in the backfield. Peterson had 15 carries and 2 targets. Thompson had 8 carries and 4 targets. I'm not going with that backfield, but I think the receivers are at least pretty interesting. Brandon, I want to talk to you about the Giants, though, because they showed a lot of life under Daniel Jones. They are facing Philadelphia in a game that Philadelphia needs to win. What's your view of this team when they're facing a team that is going to has an okay defense outside of the secondary and has a lot of desire to win that game?
I was wondering because you made it sound like your concerns about Daniel Jones are just completely gone.
No, I said you can't use him against a good pass rush, and the Eagles have a good pass rush.
Right, but I'm not giving necessarily a lot of credit for what he did against Washington.
No, I'm saying he's volatile, and volatility is good.
Yes,
as an NFL quarterback, I would not want this guy. From a DFS perspective, he's interesting.
Yes. I would assume it's the wrong end of volatility next week against the Eagles. Yeah. I think that maybe there's some overconfidence. Again, it's a 15-game slate, so nobody's really going to be that popular unless there's one amazing value play. But I really don't think that I would chase the Giants too much. Barkley looks great, but I would want to hear what your thoughts on his salary should be next week. I'm just not a believer yet, and I think that I might step back from the Giants and let everyone else kind of go. So, name that salary for Saquon Barkley? I think that might tell me everything I need to know.
Yeah, he's gotten really good usage. I thought he was a hair overpriced at $8,800 this week. He was still a good play, I thought, because of the matchup, but I thought he's a little bit overpriced, in a vacuum. I would say $8,800. I think I'd bump him up because if I thought he was a little bit overpriced last week, I can bump him up in my mind and be where he was last week. So I'd say about $8,800. What about you?
I'd probably be about 86 in that matchup, but he's 93, and I'm going to want to play Christian McCaffrey. We didn't talk about his price, but he's 11,000. We're probably going to have value to be You're looking real confused, and
I saw Myles Sanders' salary now at $7,400, and I'd rather just play him.
Yeah, so probably not a lot of Saquon, despite what I saw from the Giants this week.
I could see having some because I think that game is interesting.
Yeah, some.
And I didn't have as much of him this week as I should have. So I might wind up treating him the same way, honestly. The matchup isn't as good. So maybe I should be lower on him next week than I was this week. But
if I'm building one lineup, I'm not super tempted to play Saquon at $9,300.
I 100% agree with that. Myles Sanders would be the much superior play in that situation, assuming Jordan Howard continues to sit, which I have no idea what his situation is. Let's move now to the Raiders at the Chargers, allegedly at the Chargers, kind of at the Chargers. Maybe it was a road game. I don't know. This game was kind of stupid, I would say. What did you see here overall? Because I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I was a little bit on this game because I saw the right market shares and some value spots.
After we talked Thursday, I got way more into Keenan Allen. I used a good amount of Keenan Allen, and I don't think I've ever gotten him right, ever.
He's tough.
I got him right in like week 2 when I didn't use him, but like outside of that, I don't think I've ever gotten him right once.
Yeah, he's tough.
Thanksgiving a couple years ago, I think he was on the Thanksgiving slate, and like he went nuts, and I had a lot of him there, but I just never. I'm so confused with this guy. I hate the Chargers stink. I hate them.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about the Chargers first. That ruins the flow.
No, go ahead. Yeah, do what you need.
All right, so a few things from this game. No Josh Jacobs. I will start with the Raiders. Led to a pretty big workload for DeAndre Washington. 26 opportunities, 23 carries and 3 targets, 106 total yards and a touchdown. So if Jacobs is shut down for next week, then we've seen Washington now with 2 weeks without Josh Jacobs get a significant workload, and that has value because there will be some potential value backs next week who have not shown guaranteed safe roles, and I think that we should get that with Washington for Week 17. Now, Hunter Renfro returned to the lineup this week after missing 3 games and saw a team-high 9 targets for 107 yards and a touchdown. Nobody else had more than 4 targets. Last week, somebody said more or less in the YouTube chat that it was dumb to worry about Darren Waller because Hunter Renfro was returning to the lineup. Waller had 4 targets, 37 yards. Tyrell Williams and Jalen Richard also had 4 targets.
When you get that veteran presence of Hunter Renfro back in the lineup, you know, that gritty veteran in his age 37 season, you know, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, but I mean, so since Hunter Renfro had his role expand in Week 9 and in games that he's played since then, the team's target shares are 22% for Hunter Renfro, 16% for Darren Waller and Tyrell Williams, 13% for Jalen Richard. Waller was at like 28% in the 3 games that Renfro missed. He does not get that usage with Hunter Renfro back in the lineup. I don't understand it, but those are the facts. And just because it doesn't make sense does not mean that it's not true. So keep that in mind. For the Chargers, Phillip Rivers also doesn't make sense. He had positive passing efficiency, but just doesn't throw touchdowns. 3 of the past 4 games for him have been comfortably above the NFL average in passing net expected points per dropback, but it hasn't mattered much. And since the coordinator change in Week 9, he actually has more interceptions with 11 than touchdowns with 9. Keenan Allen led with 10 targets. Hunter Henry and Melvin Gordon each had 7. Austin Eckler had 6. Mike Williams had 4. Henry, Allen, Williams each had 2 downfield targets. Since the coordinator change in Week 9, it's now 25% of the targets for Keenan Allen, which is pretty good. 18% for Hunter Henry, which is fine for a tight end. 17.6% for Eckler, which is pretty good for a running back. 15% for Mike Williams. 14% for Melvin Gordon. Williams has 40% of the downfield targets. Henry's at 20%. Allen's at 18%. It's been a pretty tight target tree, but it's only Keenan Allen with elevated target numbers, and he's still at just 8.4 per game. Just 16 total carries here for 19 yards for the team. Melvin Gordon has scored twice despite only 15 yards. Also had 1 more target than Eckler, 7-6. Gordon played 66% of snaps. Eckler was at 59%. So Gordon reversed a 2-week trend of trailing in snaps. The offense is not good enough to chase this spot. I still prefer Gordon because of the touchdown odds. He has 25 of 26 red zone carries between them since Week 9. They're at the Chiefs next week, which is a tough environment, but they could play first round bye. Spoiler, I think. Pretty sure for the Chiefs.
The Chiefs would need the Patriots to lose to the Dolphins as 16.5-point favorites. But the Chiefs could also be the 4 seed. I don't know if being the 4 seed is the worst thing in the world because you get to face Josh Allen instead of Ryan Tannehill. It's actually been kind of good. But, yeah, you know.
I mean, the Chargers could have some motivation, but even then.
Yes. Yes, I think so. Let's talk about DeAndre Washington here because they are on the road and facing Denver next week. And like you said, DeAndre Washington in the games that Josh Jacobs has not played has had a better role than Josh Jacobs. Let's say Jacobs does not play, which is not entirely locked up because they still have odds. They can still make the playoffs. I think it's like 12.5% odds to make the playoffs. What would you pay for DeAndre Washington if Josh Jacobs were to sit again?
I thought Oakland was eliminated.
They are not, as far as I read.
Okay. So no Jacobs, but Washington. Or did you ask me about Jacobs?
No Jacobs, but Washington is playing.
I think he's probably like a mid to high $6,000 workload. I don't think we'll have to get there. They play Denver next week. I don't love the matchup. The total is probably pretty low, but
yeah. The total I think is 41 and a half, I believe.
42 and a half now.
Oh,
yeah, so.
People betting it up because of Drew Lock. Let's go.
Oh, Broncos favored by 4.
Well, you know why? It's
Drew Lock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so name that salary for Deandre Washington. You said mid 6,000s, right?
Mid to like upper 6,000, probably like 66.
Yeah, so like you think about it as a running back who will play kind of a Devonta Freeman role, right? A little bit more efficient though, just on a worse offense.
Worse offense.
Yeah, so a lot of modifications. He's really not Devonta Freeman at all. He's like Drew Brees with a mustache. I would say mid 6,000s is right. He is $6,300, and I would agree with your assessment of we're going to have value running backs who are pushed into expanded roles, and we know what Washington's expanded role is, and they need a win. So it's kind of a similar discussion as what we had before with Dion Lewis, where there are imperfections for sure, but if we can get a guaranteed workload out of a cheap guy, I'd take that. So Deandre Washington, if Josh Jacobs continues to sit, would be really intriguing at $6,300. Any final thoughts on his workload?
No, I think that covers it.
All right, let's talk about their opponent in that game then with the Denver Broncos. Broncos got off to a pretty slow start here. They were down 10-0, and I was getting a little nervous. But Drew Lock did play pretty well again. He had 0.21 passing net expected points per dropback, which is about 2 times the league average. He is up to 0.15 for the full season. That is between Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan for the full season. And given the lack of pass catchers, he's played pretty well. I think that's pretty good for the full offense. And unfortunately, because I had a lot of them, it did not lead to a big day for Courtland Sutton. He had 10 targets, but just 41 yards. In Lock's 4 starts, Sutton has 25% of the targets and 32% of the deep targets. Deshaun Hamilton is actually tied with Sutton for the team lead in deep targets, which is weird given it's Deshaun Hamilton. He converted on that volume on Sunday. I would say that Sutton is still someone I want to buy, even if the results have been mixed. Hamilton would be second for me among the pass catchers here. I'm going to put him ahead of Noah Fant, who had just 2 targets on Sunday. Probably not fully healthy. It's probably playing into it, but that's not going to change before week 17. So I would put Hamilton ahead of Fant personally. I had been out on Phillip Lindsay. Just when I think I'm out, he pulls me back in. Got some good work on Sunday. 19 carries and 3 targets on 58% of the snaps. I'm still not in on him, but he's not completely off the list like he was entering Sunday. Kerryon Johnson came back for the Lions and shared the backfield with Bo Scarborough. He had 10 carries and 1 target, playing 32% of the snaps. Scarborough had 8 carries. There is no reason to rush Johnson back. I have no idea why he's even playing, but I would not expect big things out of him next week. Kenny Golladay, 12 of 23 targets, so they're just pumping volume his way, turned into just 66 yards. He has 30% of the targets in the 2 games since Marvin Jones' injury. Danny Amendola has 25%. Golladay has 5 of 8 deep targets, so it's a bad offense, but at least we know he'll get targets, and that's worth something. They are facing the Packers next week in a game the Packers may need to win, depending on how things shake out on Monday night. So we'll keep an eye on that. But, Brandon, I think the Broncos are interesting. They're facing Oakland next week. They don't have anything to play for. Oakland may, though. But I think that Denver, the plus of them is that they're kind of evaluating Drew Lock. And I think that that's going to force them to keep playing people. So what is your view on Courtland Sutton? Because I know that you've been less into his market shares since Drew Lock became the starter.
Yeah, that's the main thing for me. I mean, Brandon Allen was just like force feeding Courtland Sutton. It's not been quite the case over the full sample with Drew Lock, but I mean, 25% of the targets still, I mean, it's not terrible. And it was about 29% from Allen. And frankly, the targets are better coming from Drew Lock. So I'm in on Courtland Sutton. It's just a matter of whether or not I'm kind of in on the overall offense. Against the Raiders, it's a better matchup, but Oakland could really try to muck that game up because if they do need to win, you don't know what they're going to do. They could just really try to play keep away. So I'm a little bit. That's kind of my main concern. But I'm
and
back.
Oakland's pretty slow in general too.
Yeah. So I'm like in on Sutton, but I don't love the matchup maybe as much as I normally would.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. He's $7,100, same thing as he was last week. That's fair. I was in on him this week. Didn't work out, but I think I'll probably be back in on him next week as well. Let's move now to Arizona and Seattle. A lot of injury news here on both sides, actually. So, Brandon, what did you see in this game?
This game, I think, ruined me more than anything else.
Yeah. I bought it. So, like the two rules for me at DFS are never get too excited about a Seahawks pass catcher and never get too excited about a Titans pass catcher. I violated both rules and I paid for it.
Yeah. I mean, the Cardinals won. They did lose Kyler Murray to a tight hamstring, but Brett Hundley came in, was decent. Just 9 pass attempts, but ran 6 times for 35 yards. It sounds like Kyler Murray's not very worried about his injury, just the tight hamstring, but just for what it's worth, Hundley threw 3 times to Kenyon Drake, 2 to Cristian Kirk, 1 to Larry Fitzgerald, and then 3 targets to 3 different tight ends. But 3 of his 9 passes were downfield, at least 16 yards, which is fun, and he ran. But I think the bigger concern is that even if Kyler Murray's back and healthy, there might not be a single reliable pass catcher here. Cristian Kirk is our boy. 5 targets, no catches this week. I mean, he's had some tough individual matchups, some tough overall pass defenses over the past few weeks. He's not 100% healthy. I mean, nobody really is this time of year, but he has 3 touchdowns in the year, and all of them came in one game.
Just keep bringing that season-long price down for next year. Like, at this point, that's all we can ask for, and I'll take it. So, I mean, bring it down, baby.
I mean, he's still at 24% of the targets in 4 post-bye games, but that's only 6.5 per game. And Kyler Murray, something we talked about way early in the year, was his average target depth being maybe dependent on his opponents, but he's at 6.4 yards. That would be basically tied for a league low over the past month, like if that was his full season share. So this is a weird offense right now, and it's really, speaking of weird, it's Kenyon Drake's show, which is exactly what you'd expect entering this year. Scored 4 times in week 15, 2 more rushing scores this week to go along with 166 yards on 24 carries in positive script. Played 80% of the snaps. He's played at least 64% of the snaps in every game with the team and 75% or more in 3 of the past 4 games. It's a very good role for him right now. They play the now eliminated Rams, so the matchup could be softer than it would be otherwise. For the Seahawks, Chris Carson was a cash game consideration for a lot of us, but he left early with a hip injury. He's been ruled out for the rest of the year. CJ Prosise broke his arm a few minutes later. He's out for the year. Football's the worst. Left tackle Dwayne Brown didn't play this week, but he's going to go. He's undergoing minor knee surgery. He's going to miss a few weeks. So rest up, everyone. It's terrible. And Seattle faces the 49ers on Sunday Night Football, so they're not on the main slate. But we should see a healthy dose of Travis Homer, I would think, next week.
Yes.
Russell, yeah.
Yes, Travis Homer.
Yeah. Russell Wilson subpar this week, 16 of 31 for 169 yards and just 1 touchdown. Took 5 sacks. Homer and Tyler Lockett led the team with 8 targets. Lockett had 1 catch for 12 yards. DK Metcalf was in my main lineup. It was between him, DJ Chark, and Tyler Boyd. 2 of those were wrong. 1 of those was very right. I chose wrong. I chose Metcalf. He faced shadow coverage from Patrick Peterson, who hasn't really been that good this year, but they just didn't throw the ball to DK Metcalf. 1 target for him, no catches. Jacob Hollister led the team actually with 64 yards and 6 targets. The past 2 weeks with Tyler Lockett healthy, I know it's a small sample, but Lockett was not himself until last week. He has a 31% target share. Hollister's at 16%. Malik Turner's at 11%. DK Metcalf at 9%. I know that's skewed by the tough matchup, but really, it's a good reminder, like you said, not to trust any Seattle pass catcher. I mean, Metcalf's target share is not going to be relevant for their single game slate, but it's worth watching for the playoffs if they, depending on what their situation is.
What do you think Kristen Michael is doing right now? Is he just chilling?
He's probably flipping tires, hitting tires with like sledgehammers.
I think he's just like
running
hanging
with a
out
parachute on his back.
in very fashionable clothes because that's what Christian Michael does. He's a well-dressed guy. I wouldn't hate it if he came back. That'd be kind of fun. Travis Homer, I would assume would get some passing down work, which would be intriguing for the single game slate. But Dwayne Brown being out, and I should have been more cautious of this offense with Dwayne Brown. I think he got downgraded Saturday. Believe that was the case. And I should have been more skeptical of them with that being the case. He's an awesome left tackle, and that's a pretty big loss to that team. So I should have been lower on them. So I think that was a mistake in my process. But I think that Homer, because he's kind of the only guy left standing, would have to be someone you'd have to focus on for the single game slates. I agree with your thoughts on the Cardinals. It's really just Drake. I love Cristian Kirk, but I've lost so much money on that guy this year. So, and again, bring that season-long price down for next year. Let's do it. This is our new motivation for Week 17. If he goes off for 6 touchdowns, I will bawl my eyes out.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Him and Fournette have just been bankroll killers.
Kamara. Prior to yesterday. Yeah.
Well, thankfully, never mind.
Yeah. Let's move now to Dallas at Philadelphia. And Carson Wentz has been struggling for most of the year, but he played well Sunday, especially when you consider that he didn't have Lane Johnson and that Zach Ertz is kind of hobbling. Wentz averaged 0.29 passing net expected points per drop back, which was his best mark since week 4, which is wild. They need to win again next week, so I'm more into this offense than I've been recently. I don't think Wentz is over his issues, given all the injuries, but he played well Sunday and deserves credit for that. Zach Ertz was another Eagle getting injured because, of course, he was playing banged up, and that led to a big day for Dallas Goddard. He had 12 targets, which is easily his most this year. Goddard had 2 deep targets for the second straight week. Didn't have any games with multiple deep targets the entire year before that. He had kind of been just like a Beasley type guy where he'd get targets, but there was no yardage upside. Shifting a little bit recently. If we look at weeks 12 and then 14 through 16, which is their current personnel, Alshon Jeffrey played part of one of those games, but not a lot. But in those 4 games, Ertz has 25% of the targets. Goddard is at 18%. Greg Ward is at 17%. Goddard is getting some upside, and that's the biggest concern with Ward. He did get some yardage on Sunday too, but I think that when you want exposure to the passing offense, we'll put Goddard as choice number 2 ahead of Greg Ward, but behind Zach Ertz, assuming Ertz is good to go. Myles Sanders, though, has kept a really solid role, and I'm super impressed with him, and I think that he might be the biggest takeaway here because he had 20 carries and 6 targets on 82% of the snaps. If we look at the 6 games that Jordan Howard has missed, Myles Sanders is averaging 15.7 carries and 5.2 targets per game, which is 26 adjusted opportunities per game. I will be very into him as long as Howard is out, and it'll get even better if Lane Johnson is able to come back. There was some optimism around Lane Johnson for this week. Didn't happen. But I think to me that says he might come back next week. And if we get Myles Sanders with Lane Johnson, I'd be very into him. Going to ask you about him in just 1 second here. Whether it was because of the shoulder or something else, Dak Prescott really struggled. He had negative 1.24 passing net expected points. The team doesn't tend to be as good on the road, but Dak was also banged up. So either way, it wasn't good. It does hurt the team's outlook going forward. It might just be week 17, though. He did keep things concentrated to the big 3 here for the Cowboys, but didn't matter. Amari Cooper, 12 targets for 24 yards. Zeke Elliott's 7 targets, 37 yards. Michael Gallup, the lone bright spot here with 98 yards on his 11 targets. Gallup still leads in overall targets since their bye week. He's up to 29% of the deep targets in that time, too. So I'd still rather have Amari straight up, but Gallup continues to be the better guy when you consider salary. As for Zeke, he had 13 carries and 7 targets. He's up to 16% of the targets the past 5 games. He has at least 4 targets in all those games. If that keeps up, he's a really good fantasy asset, and I would expect him to continue that, and they have a must-win game next week. So arrow is very much up on Ezekiel Elliott. I want to talk to you about Myles Sanders, though, Brandon. We already talked about his salary at $7,400 for next week, but I love the role. I think that is a mighty fair salary for him. What are your thoughts on Myles Sanders for week 17 based on what we've seen here recently?
Yeah, I mean, at least 15 carries and 5 targets in 4 straight games. That's
What more can you ask for?
yeah. I mean, so that's what 25 adjusted opportunities
Yeah,
at least in every
Yeah.
game. I mean, he can score on long care. Like he can take it. Like he can house it from the 50.
Yeah.
He can score as a receiver. He can score as a running back. I haven't looked at the full slate. I don't know everyone's salaries and everyone's matchups, but he might be just locked in at that price with McCaffrey in my like main lineup right now.
Yeah,
so
like
that's where I am with him.
The Giants' rush defense is very good, but I don't care. Like he's very good. His offensive line is very good, assuming that Johnson comes back, and they have a lot on the line here. So he checks every box. Myles Sanders is someone who has produced in his volume, which means he should keep on getting that volume, and I am very into him. As we look forward to Week 17 and potential for the playoffs as well for Philadelphia. Let's talk about the Cowboys here quickly, too. They're facing Washington next week, but we don't really know what Dak's health is. So where would you be on this offense if we don't get further word on what Dak Prescott's health looks like?
I'd be lukewarm, I think. Yeah. We're going to have 30 teams to pick from. Not all of them are super relevant, but if Prescott is not himself, these market shares for the receivers particularly are not good enough. It's basically like the Seahawks or Titans in market shares, but with what could be a very non-efficient passer. So I guess maybe like the Steelers or something right now. I'm not saying, but you have to downgrade these guys if the efficiency is not there.
You. Yeah, and that would make the market shares more concerning.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, that's a fair way of putting it. Just the S word.
Yeah. I just wanted to make it very clear. Like, there's a difference between.
We don't name that team on this podcast.
Oh man, how far they've fallen. Yeah.
But
there's you can overcome it with like Tyler Lockett or AJ Brown if the efficiency's there, but
or if they're cheap enough. And Michael Gallup is $6,500. Murray is $75. I'm going to use both of them next week, especially if Dak gets into full practice at some point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, if he gets into full practice, like I'll use him regardless. Most likely more Gallup than Cooper at the price. But
I think that if Dak gets into full practice, Amari Cooper's ceiling is 400 receiving yards on Sunday just because they could just blow it up and see what happens. But
yeah. But you don't like to play anyone against Washington because they're slow.
Yeah, I think I care less here.
Okay. Yeah, so I need to make that clear. If Prescott's like healthy and we know that he's trending up and things are looking good, love these guys. If he's going to be hurt and not play well, then the market shares are concerning.
That's a very important caveat. Let's move now to the Sunday night game. We had the Chiefs at the Bears. Damian Williams back for the Chiefs. What did you see in this game, Brandon?
Pretty boring. 17-0 at halftime, 26-3 overall. Williams returned, played 57% of the snaps. LaShawn McCoy was inactive as a healthy scratch. Williams had 16 of 26 running back carries. Spencer Ware and Darwin Thompson each had 5. Ware played just shy of 40% of the snaps. Thompson only played 6 snaps, so not really relevant there. Williams has really been the only back that they've given, RB1 treatment to all year. 3 targets on top of those carries, so that'll be relevant for their important game next week against the Chargers. Patrick Mahomes lit it up efficiency-wise, 0.41 passing net expected points per dropback, 1 sack in Chicago. Tough pass defense. He's just very good. And he also has been helping us out by throwing the ball to his primary pass catchers. Travis Kelce had 9 targets. Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins had just 5. The volume wasn't super high this week. Damian Williams, Spencer Ware, and Blake Bell had 3. Kelce scored, had 74 yards. Hill had 72 yards. Watkins had just 28 yards despite, decent volume. And again, it's been a concentrated target tree for weeks now. In 4 games since their bye, it's 31% of the targets for Travis Kelce, which works out to 10 per game. Tyreek Hill's at 22%. Watkins is at 15%. Now, the efficiency for Sammy Watkins has been bad, but he does lead the team, or this trio at least, with a 12.9 yard average target depth. He has 9, or the downfield targets are 9 for Hill, 6 for Kelce and Watkins. So, I mean, obviously prioritize Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but Watkins does have, there's volatility because he's getting downfield work, and he just hasn't caught them. So, I mean, the yardage upside hasn't been there, but there's a path to it if he catches the passes for once. For the Bears, Mitchell Trubisky ran 6 times for 20 yards, but actually ran 5 times in the first quarter alone. The rushing keeps him somewhat relevant, but the passing efficiency not there this week. He featured Allen Robinson with 12 targets for 43 yards. Javon Wims had 9 targets. Tariq Cohen had 4. Problematically, Anthony Miller, which, the number 2, had 2 targets. So kind of no matter which split you look at, Allen Robinson is the only trustworthy asset right now, even without Taylor Gabriel the past 4 weeks. Robinson has 30% of the targets. Miller has 22%, and Javon Wims has 18%. But Miller has had in-game target shares of 34%, 13%, 30%, and 6%, which works out to target totals of 13, 4, 15, and 2. So, again, not bankable. Also not bankable is David Montgomery. I'm not even really going to get into him. Single-digit FanDuel points in 6 of his past 7 games. Just hasn't been good enough to, outperform his offense. They're at Minnesota next week.
Yeah, let's talk about the Chiefs here, because I think the one issue with them for next week is that the Patriots play early, and they could have that first-round bye locked up before the Chiefs take the field because they're facing Miami again. That would be an issue. They could still...
Aren't the Chiefs at 1 o'clock?
Oh. They are. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about Damian Williams, because he came back, played more than half the snaps. Like you said, they've been a committee when he's been out, but when Damian Williams has been there, he's had really good numbers. And if I can get a running back tied to Patrick Mahomes, I want to do that. And I think that Damian Williams is a running back. I know that this is going to be high, but I'd be willing to pay $7,000 for him, given what we've seen from him when he's been healthy. What is an appropriate salary in your mind for Damian Williams in Week 17?
Right around there. The one assumption or the one problem is, like you said, they pretty much know that even though they're playing at 1 o'clock, they could be scoreboard watching. They also just can assume that New England's going to win. But I mean, Williams has been the only back that they've given that workload to. So I'll still play him.
Yeah.
With those assumption lineups where the Chiefs just play the whole game as usual. But he's not going to be a priority play because I have enough red flags, I think.
Sure. And I think the one thing that is helpful is that, there's a possibility Pittsburgh is the 6th seed. And if you're Kansas City, you want to face Pittsburgh in the playoffs. That's a big enough motivator where even though they're probably not going to get the 2 seed, you would want the chance of facing Pittsburgh. And I think that is enough to keep them motivated. Damian Williams for Week 17 checks in at $6,400. And I know people are distrustful of this backfield, given that they have spread out volume at times, but when healthy, from Week 8 on, Damian Williams has been not a bell cow, but he's been a respectable usage back. And again, when I can tie that to Patrick Mahomes for $6,400, I want to do that. So as of Monday, I am very much putting Damian Williams on my radar for Week 17.
Yeah, I think that's the right call. This is one of the best offenses in football. The only real concern, again, is if they take the foot off the gas, or if the Chargers decide to be the Chargers and play really well.
Yeah, the Chargers are slow too, which definitely downgrades everything, which stinks. Yeah. I hate them. But yeah, I think that overall Williams is someone I think we'll be talking about again on Thursday.
Yeah, he's looking like one of the best backs early on this week.
Exactly. So things shaping up pretty well for Week 17. There are some dependable players on teams that need wins, and some value players on teams that need wins, depending on how things break out from an injury perspective. So should be a pretty fun slate. We're going to break that down on Thursday. So once again, make sure you subscribe to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review as well, because those do help us out a ton. Brandon, final recap podcast of the year. We're done.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, I know you. Okay, so I know you joked about Kristen Michael, but I got a push notification. Seahawks interested in Beast Mode reunion ?
Oh my gosh. That's way better. I like Kristen Michael, but I love Marshawn.
Yeah, and Marshawn was in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so I mean,
He was. His quesadilla. Oh, man. Wow. That just made my day. I have I don't have as many Marshawn Lynch gifts as I have Drew Lock gifts on my computer, but I have enough. So This could be a good week.
It's going to be a good week. It just depends on how good it's going to be.
Exactly. So, Marshawn, I know you're listening. Suit up, bud. Let's get back out there because that would be awesome. That is all that we have for today. Once again, back with you Thursday to get you set. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Hopefully Week 16 went well for you, both from a season-long and a DFS perspective. And you'll tune back in on Thursday to get set for what should be a very fun Week 17. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire.